she was, I must have scared the living daylights out of her.
James Bond, 007, The Living Daylight.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars and welcome to another of my classic James Bond film reviews. Today I'm taking a look at the 1987 James Bond film, The Living Daylights. The film is directed by John Glenn and it stars Timothy Dalton, Marion Diabo, Jerome Crabb, Jordan Baker, John Rhys Davis and Art Malik. Right, this time round, Bond is kind of brought in to help a Russian general defect. That all goes kind of terribly wrong, and then he gets kind of tied up in like an international arms deal. It takes him all over the world to sort out the bad guys. Right, what are my thoughts on The Living Daylights? Well, a new era begins. View to a Kill was the last Roger Moore film, although while I was kind of researching this film, I did read that Roger Moore was interested in returning once again to do another Bond film. He did inquire if they would have him back, mainly I think because he wasn't a big fan of View to a Kill. But at that point, you know, they'd committed to Timothy Dalton, so it was sorry, Roger, but it's a no-go. So we got Timothy Dalton. Now, believe it or not, Timothy Dalton had been considered for Bond for quite a few years. He was either unavailable or he thought he was too young or whatever. The stars never aligned, basically, and he very nearly didn't even get this part because Pierce Brosnan was originally going to be Bond here, but he had to pull out because of his commitments to his TV show Remington Steele. But as we know, Pierce Brosnan did get his chance to play James Bond. So we got Timothy Dalton. Now, as we know, we only got Timothy Dalton for 2 films, which many people would say that that's a shame. I do kind of agree with that, actually. Now, I have to be really honest here. At the time when Timothy Dalton was cast as James Bond, I was not a fan. And I think that's because, as I've said before, Roger Moore was like my James Bond. I grew up with Roger Moore as James Bond. And I struggled to kind of see anybody else in the role. So, you know, I just didn't take to Timothy Dalton for quite a while, I'm not going to lie. And I was never, ever a fan of this film. I always thought this film was, dare I say it, boring. But I also, at the same time, I've never really given this film a fair chance. And I have to say, after watching this one, and I mean really watching this one, it's actually quite a solid Bond film, this one. It suffers a little bit from a thin plot. You know, sometimes I think the best Bond films are like when they've got these over-the-top villains with these outlandish plans and, you know, with memorable villains and just silliness. And I think this one, you know, it tries to be almost like quite a grounded, like gritty, like spy thriller in a lot of ways, and that is synonymous really with Timothy Dalton's reign as Bond. You know, it did feel like a different take on Bond here, absolutely. The charm and things were still there, but you know, he was, you know, a much more grounded approach to playing James Bond here, Timothy Dalton, and I can respect that now. But like I say, when I was young, I didn't buy it at all. You know, I wanted my Roger Moore back with the quips and the one-liners and, you know, the eyebrows. And we had this stern-looking, very serious James Bond. And, you know, and it didn't feel like James Bond to me. But absolutely now, especially when you consider what came later with Daniel Craig, that essentially everyone says, oh, Daniel Craig, you know, they reinvented Bond with Casino Royale and the Daniel Craig era. Well, I'm sorry. Just take a look back at Timothy Dalton. He was doing it a good 2 decades before, really. So, yeah, I was impressed by Dalton here. He handled the role really, really well. The action stuff was very, very believable, which is, you could argue, was always Roger Moore's weak point to a large degree. The action scenes, you never really bought him. But you did buy Timothy Dalton. You know, he felt tough. He felt That he could take a beating, but he could absolutely dish one out as well, and he could put a bullet between your eyes and not worry or lose a minute's sleep over it. And that's really who James Bond is. So I think he does really, really well here. But I also do think that this film suffers massively for a lack of strong villains. Very poor. Jordan Baker as this Brad Whitaker, just terrible. A very, very unmemorable villain. Jerome Crabbe as this Russian general who is, supposedly defecting, but it's kind of a trick sort of thing. I mean, Jerome Crabbe has done well at playing villains over the years. He's just so, again, unmemorable here because he acts all ridiculous and quirky at the beginning, and it would have worked, I think, because his performance at the beginning is like he's way over the top. It's like, oh, thank you for helping me defect, and then later on, I think if it had have evolved into a much more sinister portrayal, it might have worked, but it just doesn't. It's just a very, very unforgettable performance. And then you've got this henchman, like this blonde, tall Russian henchman that, you think, well, this could be a handful for Bond. This could be a villain. He's popping up all the time. He's killing all the right people. You're thinking, yeah, this is going to do well. And then when they finally confront, I get that battle between Bond. It's just unmemorable, and they just don't give him enough to do, this villain. So I think the villains across the board here are fairly unmemorable and fairly poor. And I have to say the same as well for Mariam Diabo, who plays the Bond girl. She's just so, I don't know, screechy and, oh, James, and chasing after him and swooning in his arms and, oh, James, I can't live without you sort of approach. It felt very out of touch, if you like, to what Bond girls should have been doing, especially in a movie like this, because they were trying to go in a little bit of a different direction. The film definitely needed a much more memorable and strong Bond girl, in my opinion. So I do think it suffers on a couple of levels, this film. But beyond that, I mean, I think the action is really quite good. That I loved some of the stunts here, some of the car work and the stunt work, and I love that stunt out the back of the plane where they're hanging off it. Very Uncharted-like. I know where Uncharted obviously got that idea from now. So all the action and the stunt work and everything is really top-notch stuff. But, like I say, it does have some remarkable moments, I think, this Bond film. But as first outings for Bond films go, it's a fairly solid one, this. And we all know there where it went on to in regards to the next one, License to Kill, which many regard as a very strong entry for Timothy Dalton. I haven't seen it for a good few years, but I do remember quite enjoying it. I think from what I remember, it's quite a separation from previous Bond films in regards of the violence and things like that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to checking out License to Kill, I'm not going to lie. So let me know in the comments, guys, what your thoughts are on The Living Daylights. Do you think it's a shame that Timothy Dalton didn't get more films? And don't forget to check back on the channel for plenty more content. So thanks very much for joining me.